Hi, bud. Happy Thursday. Auntie Syrup just got done doing yoga, so she's looking a little rough today, but that's not going to stop me from chapter 17 of Charlie. Are you ready? Here we go. Chapter 17, Augustus Gloop goes up the pipe. When Mr. Wonka turned round and saw what Augustus Gloop was doing, he cried out, "Oh, no, please, Augustus, please! I beg of you not to do that! My chocolate must not be touched by human hands!" "Augustus," called out Mrs. Gloop, "didn't you hear what the man said? Come away from that river at once." "This stuff is terrific," said Augustus, taking not the slightest notice of his mother or Mr. Wonka. "Oh boy, I need a bucket to drink it properly." "Augustus," cried Mr. Wonka, hopping up and down and waggling his stick in the air, "you must come away. You're dirtying my chocolate." "Augustus," cried Mrs. Gloop. "Augustus," cried Mr. Gloop. But Augustus was deaf to everything except the call of his stomach. He was now lying full length on the ground, with his head far out over the river, lapping up the chocolate like a dog. "Augustus," shouted Mrs. Gloop, "you'll be giving that nasty cold of yours to about 1,000,000 people all over the country." "Be careful, Augustus," shouted Mr. Gloop. "You're leaning out too far." Mr. Gloop was absolutely right, for suddenly there was a shriek and then a splash, and into the river went Augustus Gloop, and in 1 second he had disappeared under the brown surface. "Save him!" screamed Mrs. Gloop, going white in her face and waving her umbrella about. "He'll drown! He can't swim! Please save him!" "Good heavens, woman," said Mr. Gloop. "I'm not diving in there. I've got my best suit on." Augustus Gloop's face came up again to the surface, painted brown with chocolate. "Help! Help!" he cried. "Fish me out!" "Don't just stand there," Mrs. Gloop screamed at Mr. Gloop. "Do something." "I am doing something," said Mr. Gloop, who was now taking off his jacket and getting ready to dive into the chocolate. But while he was doing this, the boy was being sucked closer and closer toward the mouth of one of the great pipes that was dangling down into the river. Then all at once, the powerful suction took hold of him completely, and he was pulled under the surface and then into the mouth of the pipe. The crowd on the riverbank waited breathlessly to see where he would come out. "There he goes!" somebody shouted, pointing upwards. And sure enough, because the pipe was made of glass, Augustus Gloop could be clearly seen shooting inside it, head first like a torpedo. "Help! Help!" screamed Mrs. Gloop. "Augustus, come back at once! Where are you going?" "It's a wonder to me," said Mr. Gloop, "how that boy could even fit in that pipe." "Oh, but it isn't big enough," said Charlie Bucket. Look, he's slowing down." "So he is," said Grandpa Joe. "He's going to stick," said Charlie. "I think he is," said Grandpa Joe. "Oh, no, he has stuck," said Charlie. "He's blocked the whole pipe," said Grandpa Joe. "Smash the pipe!" yelled Mrs. Gloop, waving her umbrella. "Augustus, come out of there at once." The watchers below could see the chocolate swishing around the boy in the pipe, and they could see it building up behind him, pushing against the blockage. The pressure was terrific. Something had to give. Something did give. And what something was Augustus. Whew! Up he shot, through the pipe. "He's disappeared," said Mrs. Gloop. "Where does that pipe go? Quick, quick, call the fire brigade." "Keep calm," said Mr. Wonka. "Keep calm, my dear lady, keep calm. There is no danger whatsoever. Augustus has just gone on a little journey, that's all. A most interesting little journey, but he'll come out of it just fine. You wait and see." "How can he possibly come out just fine?" snapped Mrs. Gloop. "He'll be made into marshmallows in 5 seconds. Oh, impossible," said Mr. Wonka. "Unthinkable, inconceivable, and absurd. He would never be made into marshmallows." "And why not?" said Mrs. Gloop. "Well, because that pipe does not go to the marshmallow room," Mr. Wonka answered. "It doesn't go anywhere near it. That pipe, the one Augustus went up, happens to lead directly to the room where I make the most delicious kind of strawberry-flavored chocolate-coated fudge." "Well, then he'll be made into strawberry-flavored chocolate-coated fudge," screamed Mrs. Gloop. "My poor Augustus. They'll be selling him by the pound all over the country tomorrow." "Quite right," said Mr. Gloop. "Mr. Wonka doesn't seem to think that this is very funny," Mrs. Gloop said. "Just look at him. He's laughing his head off. And how dare you laugh like that when my boy's just gone up the pipe? You're a monster, she shrieked, pointing her umbrella at Mr. Wonka as though she were going to poke him with it. You think it's a joke, don't you? You think that sucking my boy up into your fudge room like that is just one great big colossal joke. He'll be perfectly safe, said Mr. Wonka, giggling slightly. He'll be chocolate fudge, said Mrs. Gloop. Never, cried Mr. Wonka. Of course he will, shrieked Mrs. Gloop, but I wouldn't allow it, said Mr. Wonka. And why not, said Mrs. Gloop. Well, because the taste would be terrible, my dear. Just imagine, Augustus-flavored chocolate-coated Gloop? No one would buy that. They most certainly would, said Mrs. Gloop. I don't even want to think about it. Nor do I, said Mr. Wonka, and I do promise you, madam, that your darling boy is perfectly safe. If he's perfectly safe, then where is he? Lead me to him this instant. Mr. Wonka turned around and clicked his finger sharply, click, 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 3 times. Immediately, an Oompa Loompa appeared as if from nowhere and stood beside him. The Oompa Loompa bowed and smiled, showing beautiful white teeth. His skin was rosy white, his long hair was golden brown, and the top of his head came just above the height of Mr. Wonka's knee. He wore the usual deerskin slung over his shoulder. Now listen to me, said Mr. Wonka, looking down at the tiny man. I want you to take Mr. and Mrs. Gloop up to the fudge room and help them find their son Augustus. He's just gone up the pipe. The Oompa Loompa took one look at Mrs. Gloop and exploded into peals of laughter. Oh, do be quiet, said Mr. Wonka. Control yourself and pull yourself together. Mrs. Gloop doesn't think that this is at all funny. Well, you can say that again, said Mrs. Gloop. Go straight to the fudge room, Mr. Wonka said to the Oompa Loompa, and when you get there, take a long stick and start poking around inside the big chocolate mixing barrel. I'm almost certain you'll find him in there. But you'd better look sharp. You'll have to hurry. If you leave him in the chocolate mixing barrel too long, he's likely to get poured into the fudge boiler, and that would really be a disaster now, wouldn't it? My fudge would become quite uneatable. Mrs. Gloop let out a shriek. I'm just joking, my dear, giggling madly behind his beard. I didn't mean it, so forgive me. I'm so sorry. Goodbye, Mrs. Gloop. Goodbye, Mr. Gloop. Goodbye. Goodbye, goodbye. I'll see you later. As Mr. and Mrs. Gloop and their tiny escort hurried away, the 5 Oompa Loompas on the far side of the river suddenly began hopping and dancing about and beating wildly upon a number of very small drums. Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop. Grandpa, cried Charlie, listen to them. What are they doing? Shh, whispered Grandpa Joe. I think they're going to sing us a song. Augustus Gloop, chanted the Oompa Loompas. Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop, the great big greedy nincompoop. How long could we allow this beast to gorge and guzzle, feed and feast on everything he wanted to? Great Scott, it simply wouldn't do. However long this boy might live, we're positive he'd never give even the smallest bit of fun or happiness to anyone. So what do we do in cases such as this? We use the gentle touch, and carefully we take the boy and turn him into something more. Will give great pleasure to us all. A doll, for instance, or a ball, or marbles, or a rocking horse. But this great boy, of course, was so utterly vile, so greedy, foul, and infantile. He left a most disgusting taste inside our mouths, and so in haste we chose a thing that, come what may, would take the nasty taste away. Come on, we cried, the time is ripe to send him shooting up the pipe. He has to go, it has to be, and very soon he's going to see, inside the room to which he's gone, some funny things are going on. But don't, dear children, be alarmed. Augustus Gloop will not be harmed, although, of course, we must admit he will be altered quite a bit. He'll be quite changed from what he's been when he goes through the fudge machine. Slowly the wheels go round and round, the cogs begin to grind and pound. We add some sugar, cream, and spice. We boil just a minute more, until we're absolutely sure that all the greed and all the gall is gone away for once and all. Then out he comes, by grace, a miracle has taken place. What boy before was loathed by men from shore to shore? This greedy brute is loved by people everywhere. For who could hate or bear a grudge against a luscious bit of fudge? I told you they love singing, cried Mr. Wonka. Aren't they delightful? Aren't they charming? But you mustn't believe a word they said. It's all nonsense, every bit. Are the Oompa Loompas really joking, Grandpa? Asked Charlie. Well, of course they're joking, answered Grandpa. They must be joking. At least I hope they're joking. Don't you? Love you, bud. I hope you enjoyed that one. Talk to you soon.